Remind me tomorrow. I'll call the school committee meeting of February 14th to order at 5 p.m. We all stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Rogers, if you take roll.
Kira Thompson. Here. Colleen Marcus.
Here.
Nancy Farrell.
Here.
Kathy Alevras.
Here.
Diana Coyne.
Here.
Robert Mancini.
Here.
Mayor Reichelt.
Here. We'll start off our superintendent interviews tonight with approval of the interview questions. You all have them before you. I'll entertain a motion to approve. Ms. Farrell?
Motion to accept the finalist interview questions for the position of superintendent of West Springfield Public Schools.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll take roll. Mr. Mancini?
Yes.
Ms. Coyne?
Yes.
Ms. Alevras?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Marcus?
Yes.
Ms. Farrell?
Yes.
I vote yes. Finalist interviews. First, we have Tom Landers. Thank you, Liz. I'm sorry, I should have introduced you to...
Good evening. I'm Thomas Landers. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate you moving me to the finalist level. I guess I'm going to start with my...
Yeah, let me read my little intro that I have written here for me.
Thank you.
Welcome. As you know, to prepare for this interview, we asked you to complete the following performance task. We know that effective school districts analyze data and identify clear improvement priorities and the high-leverage practices to improve student learning. As part of the interview, we'd like you to review the DART and MCAS data available for the West Springfield schools and identify data points which you believe should be areas of focus. After identifying the data point, please outline for us the process you would follow to take you from identifying the data points to creating priorities and honing in the high-level practices, leverage practices to improve instruction. And just a reminder to keep it to 10 minutes or less. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and again, thank you for moving me to the finalist round. So, I would start with a guiding principle slide that this is not my metaphor, but it's a metaphor that resonates with me because schools and teachers are working so hard. There's so much that's going on in schools today. Data should be used for illuminating and shining the light on things that we do well and things that we can do better and things that we maybe can do more of, but not used in a punitive way. So that's a slide that I'll use twice tonight because it is foundational to the way that I try to lead. And another guiding principle is a balanced approach to anything, but in terms of this particular presentation, we look at both achievement data and we look at growth data. So achievement is the overall score that a student in a school or subgroup earns, and then growth is a comparison of how students do relative to students who are in a similar cohort. So there are two different ways to look at it. The overall score, the overall achievement, and how far that particular student or that particular subgroup or that particular school has grown since the last year of testing relative to similar like students. So with that said, the state of Massachusetts identifies growth percentiles in 3 different ways: low growth, moderate growth, and high growth. And I chose the first data point to focus in on is student growth percentiles for our elementary schools and our middle and high school. And I chose this because this data jumped out at me. I compared 2019 to 2022, and even though we certainly, both statewide and both in West Springfield, generally speaking, we saw some dip in achievement scores, there are some impressive and data points, and there are some things that certainly stand out in a positive way, and I wanted to include that as well. Remember that this is between 2019 and 2022. This is in the middle of the pandemic, the darkest period in schools that we've experienced in modern times, where we hear about backsliding and learning loss. And when you look at the majority of these growth scores, you see that for the most part, we stay pretty even. There are some spots where we have dipped, and there are some spots that we grew. If you look at FOSI, for example, in ELA, 19 compared to 22, you had a higher growth score for that. FOSI, if you look at math, they stayed constant. And then if you go down and look school by school, you'll see some dips. I mean, 48 to 47 in ELA at Memorial is kind of negligible to me. There's certainly a little bit more in terms of math. If you look at Mittenegg, there's some really impressive things that happened between 19 and 22. It's interesting. I'd want to know more about what happened at Mittenegg and ELA. And then if you look at math, it's very impressive, that growth. Coburn had a dip in both ELA and math, but if you consider what some of our students and families at Coburn are going through, and they're some of our most at-risk learners, considering that was during the pandemic, there are things to grow on. There are things to grow and things to build on there. Tatum didn't see a lot of growth. This is growth, not achievement, but on the same token, that's right at the tip of low growth. The majority of this chart shows that we're in the moderate growth area, and those are things to build on. At the middle school, we saw in terms of ELA, we stay pretty constant. We actually jumped a point in growth, and we did see in the middle school, you see some math, you see a dip, and there are areas that we got to dig into this data more and see what happened there and how we can help teachers and students. And then at the high school, we certainly see a dip in terms of growth for ELA. That's a considerable dip, and then you see less of a dip in math. So again, in aggregate, almost all of these scores are in the moderate growth range, something to celebrate, something to dig into and find out why. And in the few areas where they're low growth, there are opportunities there to see why and make sure that we're using data to help teachers, help students. The next slide I chose to look at was achievement versus growth. So scores, and there are 4 categories: meets standards, exceeds the standards, partially meets the standards, and not meeting. So what I chose to focus in on, I gave you data from 2019 and 2022 in ELA, math, and science, and this is for the high school. This is for 10th grade in particular. So I won't go through 19, but I wanted to show 19 just to kind of see in the right-hand column, you see the first column is West Springfield High School, the second is the state of Massachusetts, and the third is plus or minus how we did relative to the state. So I included 19 to show a comparison, but also to show in the furthest right-hand column that there are some patterns that replicated or almost replicated in 2019 relative to 2022. Looking at 2022 achievement for 10th graders in ELA, we certainly see a difference between how our students performed and how the state performed, and we see that in math as well, although that gap is smaller in math. And then we see something to celebrate in terms of science. So, and if you look at the science scores and achievement results in 2019 and 2022, we certainly are doing well there, almost matching the state in 19 and outperforming the state by 7 points in science in the high school scores. So what does this data show me? My job on this performance task was to say what jumps out at me. What jumps out at me was, looking at how did we do overall, and then how did our highest needs student do? So I included in parenthesis, I included the HN, stand for high needs, and you'll see that there's a pretty commensurate difference between the performance of our high needs students and all of our students overall in English, somewhat less in math, and again, our high needs students are outperforming the high needs students from the state in science. So what can you do with that? Where do you go with that? It's amazing what's now on the website of the DESE website. It used to be a lot, more generic. You used to have to go into Edwin Analytics to get down to the question level, but you can get down to the question level online. There's even more you can do with Edwin Analytics. You can get down to the student level. You can sort by teacher. Although you don't do that on the website, you can look at what questions, what items, what standards did our students have the biggest discrepancy between our performance and the state. So I chose in English, the next slide shows that. So it is English, grade 10 from 2022, and this is the aggregate scores for all students. And the 4 areas that jump out at me all have to do with essay writing. Write an essay explaining how characters support the main character in 2 different excerpts and use information from each excerpt to develop the essay. There's an 8-point differential between us and the state. Write an argument in the form of a speech on a topic presented in 2 articles. Use information from the articles to develop that argument. And then 2 standards having to do with essay writing, one with idea development, topic sentence development, thesis sentence writing, and then one with regarding conventions, the mechanics of writing. So even though it is not easy to do this, I would argue that our charge is clear that is where we can put some focus. We can put some focus and work into that, and I know that that's happening. I saw great things. I talked to several teachers at the high school and at the middle school on Friday, so I don't want to say that this is not happening, but this is an area where we have to keep working on. And it's not just the job, I want to say, it's not just the job of the English department. Every teacher is a teacher of reading and writing, and it also, what happens at the middle school has an upward trend towards the high school. But those are some areas where we need to do work, and we have opportunities to make growth in English. The next slide that I included was very similar, 10th grade mathematics, and I did the same exact thing for those particular questions, looking at where was the biggest gap between what our students did and what the state did. And I just went down and I listed the top 5 that I identified, ranging from a 7-point difference to an 11-point difference, and then I just indicated whether that was a geometry or an algebraic standard. Something that I wanted to point out on the positive at the bottom of this slide is our high needs growth for math students at West Springfield High School was on par with the state growth for high needs students. So both were in the 47th percentile. So again, that's positive information. Why is that happening? What did we do? How can we do more of that? But those 2 on the high school level, those spoke to me. You look at all kinds of data. You almost get dizzy looking at all the data and looking at it and pulling it apart. But the charge here was to look at some data points, see what you can extrapolate, see what it means, and see what you would do. So in terms of getting back to our guiding principles, not to hammer people with scores, but to illuminate and help and shine the light upon, and considering that our data analysis should be student-centered And everything that we're doing is to focused on helping our students and helping our teachers and our para-educators who are doing this work. I came up with 3 different slides about opportunities and potential next steps. One is the use of data itself, data use opportunities. And I simply said, to ensure MCAS data specific to the levels, elementary, middle, and high, specific to the schools, and specific to the students, by looking at data that's even more detailed and in-depth than is allowed on the DESE site, is gathered, analyzed, and distributed at the schools, to the team, to the department, to the individual teacher level. To create opportunities, I indicate PD, release time, team time, it could be department meeting time. I would also say there's an opportunity for vertical alignment and vertical planning, to let teachers have this delivered to them and let them see the patterns of their own students over time. And lastly, I say that I think that the superintendent, the next superintendent, and central office staff has to kind of take the lead on this, because I will say, and I'm somewhat biased because I'm a building principal, and I've been in a school for 29 years at different roles. Teachers are doing more than ever. Assistant principals and principals are doing more than ever. So I think that even though you have either a team leader or you have an assistant principal and a principal, department chairpersons where they exist pulling this data, I really think that it would be the job of the next superintendent and the superintendent's team to pull this data, to analyze this data, put this data on a platter for teachers and department chairpersons and team leaders and instructional coaches, and then plan the PD and the time around that. Don't make them go dig for their own data. Make it easy for them. Serve it up to them to help them. PD opportunities that I would champion, if given this position, is to ensure that the data is informing targeted PD for teachers and targeted intervention and instruction for students and supports for students. I mentioned to carve out time for common planning time and for vertical planning time. I heard some great evidence the other day at the schools of common planning time that's happened. I did hear, and I'm not saying it's not happening, because I only got a slice of life in the West Springfield Public Schools from the inside the other day, but I heard that vertical planning would be something that would be greatly welcomed by teachers. And then I said build on the practice, and I met with a social studies history department chairperson and the EL department chairperson on Friday, and they both talked about the benchmark work that they're doing. The benchmark work that quarterly, it was focused on social studies. It was a social studies history department chairperson, and the EL department chairperson is also a social studies teacher. So both of them talked about that work, but they also said this is already going on in every department. And that it was quarterly. So opportunities for PD to build on that, to build on common assessments, common activities. What I loved about what I heard on Friday was that this wasn't necessarily even for grades, but it was a check-in for students and it was a check-in for instructors. And then the curriculum, my next slide has to do with the curriculum alignment work to continue. And I touched a little bit, since I touched on elementary, to continue the implementation, the work of inter-reading series at the elementary level. And I mentioned, as you all know, it's the first time in many years that the common reading curriculum across classrooms and across schools exists. That's a great thing. Heard a little bit from Principal Danby about illustrative math and how it is being used to, specifically Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry, continue to focus on curriculum work in those areas. As I mentioned in terms of the English slide, definitely focus on essay writing, topic sentence development, inclusion of supporting evidence argument in both middle and high school. Both of those department chairs shared examples of that work that they're already doing in that, and that they're building. They were looking to build on. Both of them were looking at documents and having students pull information out of there and make an argument. So even though I'm talking about social studies right now, I'm going to go back to the fact that all teachers are teachers of reading and writing, and that work is going to help our students perform on the ELA challenges because they're writing essays in more than just English classes. And then I mentioned there's an opportunity, and I don't know what the current state or inventory of mapping courses exists, but where it does exist, great, and where it doesn't, there's an opportunity to build on that. And where it does exist, are we showing fidelity to that mapping of those courses? I use this slide because I said the practices that I just mentioned two of them are directly tied, or they're all tied to two of the current district improvement plan goals. So the existing district improvement plan goals, which are also school improvement plan goals, one has to do with teaching and learning, and it's specifically focused on MTSS and tiered instruction. It mentions Tier 1 in particular, but it certainly addresses all the Tier 1, 2, and 3. And the second goal of using assessment and data analysis to improve instruction, those two district improvement goals that are in place now through from 21 to 24, according to the websites, that is exactly the kind of work that I would lead in this district and work with teachers and work with curriculum leaders and work with department chairpersons and teams and central office if given this opportunity. The third goal, very important, is to increase outreach to families and do it in a culturally responsive and respectful and inclusive way. Three really important and great goals. But I just wanted to mention that two of the goals tie directly to what I just tried to talk about. In my last two slides, I just say another guiding principle is to remember that we measure student success in a variety of ways. MCAS data is important, but it is not the only piece of information, and even MCAS data itself can be looked at through different angles. So the last slide I mentioned of just examples of really important data, including MCAS, but going beyond MCAS achievement scores and MCAS growth percentiles, which I referred to, but also grades, report cards, standard-based report cards, attendance data. I looked at our chronic absentee data. I know everyone's having a challenge with that across the state. We certainly are. The Dibble screener information and data that is ongoing at the elementary levels. I don't know if West Springfield Public Schools administers the Youth Risk Behavior Survey or something like it, but that's a really important part of data collection in terms of asking students and staff about culture and about climate of their schools. There's an opportunity for vocal climate results. That's through the MCAS that's offered at the end of, MCAS in 4th, 5th, 8th, and 10th. And then I mentioned, so many opportunities for common activities, common exams, et cetera, that gives you a whole different set of data points from teachers, from people who are on the ground, who are doing this important work. So, try to keep it under 10 minutes, and I apologize if I went over, but those are the things that when I looked at the data online, those are a couple things that jumped out at me that would guide our work if I was the person to be given this position.
Welcome, Tom. Thank you for taking the time to apply for West Springfield Superintendent of our public schools. And thank your staff in Longmeadow for the wonderful visit we had. My question, what have you done to prepare yourself for the superintendency? How would you describe your leadership style? And what are the strengths that you bring to the position? What would be your personal professional development plan were you to become our next superintendent?
What have I done for preparation? What is my leadership style? What are my strengths?
What would be your personal professional development plan were you to become our superintendent?
And personal and professional development plan. In preparation for this, I have read as much as I possibly could. I've talked to as many people as I could, teachers and pretty much anyone who would speak to me, mostly teachers, and tried to learn as much as I possibly could about the inner workings of the West Springfield Public Schools. Thank you. Nope, that's okay. So that preparation has, from the day that I decided to apply, that has been my practice, and I've been trying to learn as much as I possibly could through websites, through DESE report card, through the DART tools online, et cetera. So that has been an ongoing practice. My leadership style, I tried to give, I was going through my cellar a couple weeks ago, and I was trying to throw things out and recycle, and I came across a box, and I was ready to recycle it, and it was old letters of recommendation dating back to 1999. So the dark blue folder that I gave you tonight is that. And I said, you know, people always talk about being a team player. Who's not gonna say they're a team player? Who's not gonna say they're collaborative? Who's not gonna say that they're inclusive? So as I sat there in my cellar thinking about I should throw more stuff out, I said, what better example to kind of let other people's words going back about 23 years or so, from 1999 through the mid-2000s up through, you know, November of 2022 when I applied for this position, let their words speak to my leadership style. And I would say that I don't have a problem leading. I don't have a problem standing up and saying, I'll own this. You know, if there's an unpopular decision that's made, I own it. But I also think that the decision is, all decisions are better when you listen to others, when you include other people's opinions, whether they agree or disagree with you. You know, I process things before I come to a conclusion. I am respectful. I listen. I hope you heard that at Long Meadow High School on Friday. No matter who I'm dealing with, people deserve to be shown respect. They deserve to be have you focus completely on them. They need to feel listened to, and they need to feel included in the process. So my leadership style is that. My leadership style is to lead by example. My leadership style is to work really hard. My leadership style is to say, I'm sorry, and I made a mistake when you make a mistake, and to go back at it and try to do it better. So, you know, looking at my strengths, I would say the things that I tried to just articulate about my leadership style are also my strengths. I have a good work ethic. In my current job, you know, I work 100+ nights a year. That's the job of a principal, and at the high school that I work at, it's a busy, dynamic place. It's open till about 10 p.m. every night. You know, my work ethic is a strength. My willingness to show empathy to others is a strength. My willingness to and my belief in listening to others is a strength. And my ability to make a decision at the end of the day after gathering input and data and feedback from others is a strength. My personal and professional development plan, if I was chosen, would be, you know, in different increments. If I was chosen to be the next superintendent, I would continue to learn as much as I possibly could about the district, but I would also go into a phase of trying to meet with stakeholders. I would try to meet with central office staff. I met with them. It was a blink on Friday. You know, it was great to meet with some, you know, the 4 principals I got to meet with, but it was quick. And I would want to meet with principals and central office staff and you as a committee. I would want to meet with HR. I would want to meet with special education. I would want to meet with IT. You know, all of that would be a plan to learn as much as I possibly could and to start developing relationships and plans, so when I began the position formally, I could hit the ground running. Thank you.
Hello. Special education is a particular challenge because of the complexity of rules, service needs, students, and parent concerns. When you assess the effectiveness of your special education program, what are some of the criteria you will use?
So, compliance and equity. Compliance are regulations and rules, and we have to do that. Those are non-negotiables. We have to make sure that we're competent and that we are meeting the requirements, the numerous requirements of the law. And then, in terms of equity, I would judge us on, are we making the curriculum accessible to all students who are on with a disability, all students who are EL students, all students who are SLIFE students. Are we just checking the box for compliance, or are we really ensuring that instruction is equitable and access to the curriculum is equitable, and that we are constantly looking at what we do and how we do it? So I would judge myself and us on both compliance and equity through instruction, through assessment, through feedback, through contact and communication with families, et cetera.
Thank you.
So this year we are implementing a new literacy program based in the science of reading. Please share with us your understanding of the science of reading, as well as how you would support this initiative, which is still very new and uncomfortable to many teachers and administrators, while working collaboratively with all stakeholders to move us forward.
So I listened at Coburn on Friday, and I hopefully did more listening than talking, and the teachers were very honest about the positives and some of the frustrations and the fact that they're somewhat overwhelmed by the amount of newness that they're dealing with. But with that said, I also heard that they were, not all of them, but many of them said, we finally have a reading series that the person in the next room is also doing, and the fact that it's not just local to this building, that we could go to any of the elementaries. We could actually do PD with people in other buildings. So I want to be upfront that I heard positives as well as some concerns and worries. I give West Springfield credit for being on the front edge of understanding that I'm a high school person. I'm married to an ELL elementary teacher. She told me to you have to look at this sold a story. So I started there with a podcast, and I learned a lot. And I said, oh my gosh. Lucy Calkins went from hero to not hero at the end of that podcast. And then from there, I'm moving into the science of reading. So it involves, it is a movement away from the whole language approach, and it is unapologetically inclusive of phonics. And it is more balanced literacy than a lot of districts had been practicing. All three of my sons learned through, the whole language approach, and two didn't have problems, and one struggled a little bit more. So I was particularly interested when I started learning about this, earlier this year. But it is being implemented now in our elementary schools. It's the first full year of implementation. There were some pilots last year. The screening tool being used as Dibbles, and there's constant feedback and data being gathered by teachers, and it's a move in the right direction. I know that the teachers at Coburn are dealing with not just a new reading series; they're dealing with a new building, a new principal, a new model. So there's a lot of layers to the newness. But in terms of the reading series into reading and the screening tool and the very purposeful inclusion of phonetics in that it is positive, and it is a step in the right direction, and it's going to help even more students than just the approach of whole language.
Ms. Levers?
Welcome.
Thank you.
How will you keep the school committee informed? In particular, what is your strategy around issues that are your responsibility, but where the school committee may have interest?
So I would want to know your procedures first. I would want to know who do you want me to communicate directly with you? Do you want me to communicate through a particular person or two? But my job, if given this position, would be to keep you informed of any big and important trends or issues or events. It would be ongoing. It would be my strategy around issues that are my responsibility, but where you have an interest is almost all of it would be my responsibility, I'm guessing, and part of that responsibility would be to keep you informed. Things happen quickly, things happen, they unfold rapidly, and you would be, the committee would be first and foremost in terms of, because you represent people in our town, you would be first and foremost for me to keep in the loop on whether it's good news, whether it's bad news, whether it's news that is unfolding and it's of an emergency basis, but I will err on the side of more rather than less communication.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. For the past 3 years, West Springfield has been engaged in the important work of educational equity through the lens of MTSS. As you know, issues of diversity, equity, inclusion can be interpreted in many different ways, from racial, gender, religious diversity to neurodiversity, various levels of abilities and special education, to issues of socioeconomic diversity and class. What are your overarching thoughts about these classifications and your experience in leading this kind of work? What would you work to ensure that none of these important populations are lost in the shuffle?
So, as an educator for the last 29 years, educational fairness and equity and being respectful and inclusive are part of what I try to do every day. And the schools and the teams that I've been part of, I've been fortunate to work with other good people who are committed to that. So that is a foundational part of what I do and what I would try to do in this position. And being the spokesperson for our district, you have to be out in front on that and respectful and inclusive of all. We're a really diverse town, racially, ethnically, religiously, socioeconomically. we have a significant population who are disabled and on a plan. We have a significant amount of EL students. We have a significant amount of students who are classified as low income. I think one of the best ways to practice what we preach, and I would preach that, but practice it is good, equitable instruction, that all students are being given access to the curriculum. All students are being given access to the various opportunities that we have in our schools. All students are, and we're reaching out to their families, understanding that all students do not come to school every day on an equal footing, to make sure that we're reaching out to our families, that we're seen to our families and our students as partners. Our schools are seen as their schools and schools that they're welcome at. And with that said, I would also say that with all of our differences in West Springfield, at the end of the day, the organic diversity that we have in our town is one of our strengths. So I would work really hard and really transparently to make sure that our entire team was being respectful and inclusive and paying attention to best practices and listening as much as we're talking, and also recognizing the strengths in our community, and at the end of the day, acknowledging our differences, but also focusing on our likenesses and focusing on the fact that all parents love their children, and all parents want their children to do well, and all parents want their children to succeed. And we have to make sure we're doing that for all students and all families in our community.
Thank you.
Mr. Mancini.
Good evening, Tom.
Good evening.
The citizens in our community demand value for their tax dollars and transparency and financial accountability. In this light, tell us about how you have ensured that the budget you propose and the financial plan that you oversee as approved by the school committee is as compact and efficient as possible. How do you develop the budget proposal? I have 3 questions for you, so
sure.
If you can see them if
Yep.
you want to answer one at a time. How do you develop the budget proposal?
So I would want to, taking into consideration, Bob, what you said in the first part, and how do I develop the budget proposal? I would want to make sure that the budget reflects our goals. Currently you have the school committee has goals. There's a district improvement plan that has goals. The school improvement plan in our district, which is great, matches our goals. That's not the case in every district, but so the goals of the district improvement plan seem to match the school improvement plan goals. I would want to make sure our budget reflects that. I would want to make sure that, the professional development that we're working on, the curriculum that we are purchasing or trying to support and grow, all of those things are reflected on our budget, and that it is cohesive, and that there's sense to it, and there's a direct connection that if someone looks at our budget, they say, well, this ties back to the PD goals, the educational goals that you're outlining for our district. So that's how I would try to develop a budget proposal. Whose input would I solicit? I would certainly work with the business manager closely. That is a role that's inherently important to a superintendent. I would work with central office staff. I would work with you as committee members. I would work with building principals and other educational leaders in the buildings, because I respect what they do, and they are on the ground, and I would want to know what is working and what isn't working. Even if it's an important goal, but the particular way that we're trying to achieve that might not be working, can we step back and look at a different way to do that? So I would solicit a lot of people's input, including the committees, and including certainly educational leaders, inclusive of principals, but going beyond that. And again, I would certainly work closely with the business manager. And what has been my history working with municipal officials like a city council or a mayor to garner support for your budget? So to be fair, my budget as a building principal has been pretty much given to me, and I have to live within that. I want to be upfront. So I would, and then I negotiate, or I chat with my superintendent and business manager to ask for more, this and that. I have to defend what I am spending on, what I'm investing in. They ask me for evidence of what is working, how it's working. Sometimes they say, that's great, it's working, but you're going to get less money, so how are you going to do that more efficiently? And sometimes, sometimes there's an increase in the budget if there's an agreement of a particular project that we're working on. But I will say I work with municipal officials and school committee in particular, DPW, IT, the town on a lot of different efforts, and I try to work respectfully and collaboratively and openly, and I would do the same in if given this position in building the budget. Thank you.
Ms. Thompson.
Given the stress in the lives of young people today and the social, academic, and even financial pressures they face, how can educators in general, and a superintendent in particular, have an impact on the emotional well-being of the students? How do you view the social and emotional well-being of children in the context of establishing a high-performing school population in the decades to come?
So, stress and emotional well-being of students is a huge issue in our country. It existed long before the pandemic. Personally, I think that these things that are about 13 years old have a lot to do with it. We started to see, with the birth of the smartphone, we started to see 3, 4, 5 years into that, and then obviously the pandemic exacerbated it. So I would want to make sure that we are, on the ground level and the school levels, that we are addressing it on multi levels. So one is the curriculum. Are we embedding, the social and emotional framework? I like CASEL. I know CASEL works in conjunction with responsive classroom and PBIS, and I know that's used in the district. I like that the CASEL framework because it is a framework and it allows for appropriate integration at whatever level you're at. And I also like it because it's about helping students to empower themselves, see themselves as others see them, work their way through tough situations, develop resilience, work effectively with others, see how, understand and see what healthy relationships look like, help them to be an upstander rather than a bystander. So that framework can be embedded into a lot of different things. It can be embedded into various subjects that we teach and experiences that students have in school. I think that I would say that. I would also say that I think that the health and wellness curriculum offers a particular natural entryway into those skill sets because our PE and our health teachers, we call them wellness teachers where I'm at because, quite frankly, they do so much more than movement. Even though we try to embed it everywhere, we're in all aspects of schooling. Health and wellness, I think, offers that a particular opportunity for that because it brings together so many aspects of wellness, physical and mental health. I think it's important to make sure that our students have access to both mental health education and mental health counseling through SACs and social workers. But tier one best practice in terms of SEL is to make sure that students are learning about some of the more common depression and anxiety, that they don't feel alone, that they didn't know that it's normal for them to feel that they know what best practices are, that they can wrap their heads around and have a chance to practice mindfulness and working their way through a situation and relaxation, and that we all get nervous and we all are going to feel panicked at times. So I think it's a combination of curriculum, making sure that it's embedded in our curriculum, making sure that we're being very purposeful in terms of what we're teaching to students, and also making sure that we have the capacity and advertising to both students and families that there's access to counselors. Schools are not mental health facilities. We're dealing with a lot of issues today, so I want to be upfront about that. You have to partner with outside agencies and entities and mental health professionals. But there's a triage bridge that schools play, and it's really, really important. And if we do that and we do that well, we can ensure that we can. I mean, that leads to a decrease in chronic absenteeism. You know, school avoidance, a big part of that is making sure that we have counselors who are working with our students who can also we can help them to establish, you know, a counselor or a therapist outside, and hopefully the two can talk to each other so the school is seen as a safer place for students. That's an extreme case, but that's also something real that schools are dealing with today. So does that answer? Okay, thank you.
How would you define high-quality instructional materials? What is an example of a high-quality curriculum, and what makes it high quality? Have you previously assessed instructional materials to ensure quality? And can you tell us about a time when you had to address the use of poor quality instructional materials?
So yes, yes, I've had to you know, been charged with assessing instructional materials both as a principal and as part of a team when I was a social studies department chairperson. I would define high quality instructional materials as resources that are current in best practice and that are inclusive of information, no matter what the subject material is. In my experience, you know, we looked for social studies resources that was both texts but also additional resources that asked students to and gave opportunities for students to tie social studies and history standards back to their lives, to give some meaning, that it was relative to them, that it was, you know, that it gave ideas to teachers and opportunities to students to make sure that they had differentiation in them, that there was different ways to learning, it was multimodal, that they could use it as a resource, that it could help the teacher to, when they're developing, you know, as a department, as a team, when they're developing assessment, that they could, that again, differentiation was part of that. And, you know, my experience in terms of choosing certain ones over others, I've been involved in where you pilot a 3 or 4 different books and you look at them and you ask teachers to go through the process, a formal process where you have teachers on that, you have maybe a student or two on that, you have some parents who are not educators on that, and they discuss it. And you know, I think the best is to do it. Sometimes you're rushed, but best is when you kind of have a year to do it, and a teacher has been able to use a couple different resources. So, I mean, that's my experience with that. I would, and my approach would be, you know, if we're looking at to see what instructional materials were high quality, I would want to have input from classroom teachers and principals, instructional leaders. I think it's important to have student and parent representation on those if you're looking at something formally. Thank you. Absolutely. So we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of moving into Long Meadow High School next week. So I just shared photos and videos of 10 years ago, you know, in an email yesterday. So I had that experience. It was a massive project. I remember that we were building. Remember, West Springfield visited us because we were about a year ahead of West Springfield in that process. So West Springfield learned from our successes and our failures and our mistakes. But I went through that process, and it is extremely in depth. I mean, you're talking about identifying a vision for what you want the school to be, all of the different things that you want to make sure can happen during school hours, and if you're going to use it as a community resource. And then there's time spent down to like what kind of cabinets and what kind of, space and what kind of storage you're going to have. And, how should a science room be different in addition to obviously the obvious, how should the layout of a science room be different from an English room? And should an English room be the same as a social studies or a math room, and can those be interchangeable, or should there be, things unique to them? So I was part of that project from the get-go. I worked in the old Longmeadow High School for several years. I've been in Longmeadow for 18, and like I said, we're experiencing our, we're having the 10-year anniversary. So I was there in the old building. I was there from the beginning when the first shovel went into the ground, and the long and arduous and really, really important but really, really exhausting work of building a new school and thinking about everything that goes into it. And the MSBA was part of that. They were front and center. We had to go in front of them and present a few times, and they said, they told us to do things differently. Sometimes they said yes. Sometimes, we were thinking about making our science classrooms integrated throughout the building, and they represented the taxpayer, and to save money and to be more efficient, they told us that wasn't going to happen. And so that's my experience with the MSBA, and certainly had a lot of experience in that project of the building. I was an assistant principal at that time, and I was involved with my principal and with the building committee for several years. Thank you.
How do you seek opportunities to improve the learning environment to better meet the needs of students from all over the world, and for students who have been historically vulnerable, underserved, and marginalized, including multilingual learners and students with disabilities? I would actually prefer to say various abilities.
So I would try to answer that through saying quality instruction and respectful outreach to our communities. So I would go back to what I said before in terms of instruction, and access to that. The curriculum is huge to making sure that the needs of our students, whether they're from Haiti or the Ukraine, or whether they were born, near Mittenegg Park, all of those students who, are important. And I think that needs to be the unifying aspect to make sure that we are being inclusive of all students, vulnerable students, underserved students, marginalized students, and our EL learners and our students with disabilities. So I know I'm repeating that theme, but I think, we're a school, and it comes down to good instruction. It comes down to, fair, accessible, quality instruction, respectful classrooms, inclusive classrooms. In terms of outreach, it's inherently important in all communities, but in a community like ours here in West Springfield, to make sure that we're genuinely and respectfully reaching out to all of our families. I know that West Springfield works very hard and very intentionally to make sure that we are offering interpreters, and we are making our websites and our information accessible to parents. I know that there's an effort here, and it's a great effort, to make sure that we're hiring people who represent our communities, our EL communities, whether they're interpreters, whether we can get them into school as teachers. If they can't do that, get them in as paraeducators, get them into the building. I know that best practice is to make sure that we're making our schools we're kind of kicking the doors open to our schools and reminding everyone that they're a town resource and we want them there, try to get our parents there of all different backgrounds, of all different parents who have children of all different abilities, to make sure that we are making them feel welcome and we are making them feel part of the process. And you do that through having as many events and opportunities where they feel welcome to come to the school. Some are academic, some are not. But to try to, we're in our certain schools, try to make them wraparound schools, that we're honing in on the needs of the different populations. Are we, for our EL learners and families, for example, are we doing everything we can to use our buildings, after school hours to offer, English learning opportunities for parents and families? Are we doing adult driving, classes for adults? Are we doing everything that we can to make sure that we're using our school resources in conjunction with efforts that the town are doing and with the focus being, you're welcome, you're part of us, and you're important.
Thanks.
Mr. Mancini?
Have you been involved in state-level activity related to public education? How would you see yourself representing on district, lobbying, or participating on task force and working group? What issues are of most concern to you?
Have I been involved in state-level activities related to public education? I have. I've been involved in, I can think back to when the standards and frameworks for social studies, that was an ongoing process between, in the early 90s. That changed a few times. I was involved in that. I was a representative of my school, and then when I changed school, when I was an assistant principal, that was still going on. The frameworks switched back and forth. There was, specifically it was when we were trying to, the state was trying to figure out, is there going to be a social studies MCAS, and should it be world-based, should it be US-based? So I was that's one example of something that I've been involved in. Right now, I'm part of a state-level MTSS academy to make sure that both academically and SEL-based, so I'm part of that through DESE right now. As another example, how would I see myself representing our district, lobbying or participating on task forces or working groups? I would do everything in my power to represent and lobby and advocate for West Springfield students and staff. And what issues are most concerned to me? Safety of students, safety of our schools, quality of instruction, fair access to all students regardless of ability or language or socioeconomics, so access to the curriculum. I would say those things stand out as things that I would fight really hard for the students and families and staff of West Springfield Public Schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The last question now. We'd like to give you the opportunity to make a closing statement. Please include in your statement why you're seeking the West Springfield superintendency and why now.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you again for having me. I appreciate being here at this finalist level. I would want the committee and viewers at home to know a few things about me, and it comes down to I'll break it into three parts. First and foremost, I am a professional educator. I've been an educator for 29 years. I started my teaching in the Chicopee Public Schools. I taught there for 12 plus years. And that work as a classroom teacher is foundational to who I am today. I carry that with me. All the work that I did there in the Chicopee Public Schools when I was a very younger educator, was really influential to me in my foundational level. The 12-plus years I spent in the classroom made me a better assistant principal. The 9 years that I spent as assistant principal has made me a better principal. And I do this, and I go to work every day, and I go to work with the focus and the purpose of serving students and families and helping get obstacles out of the way of educators who are working harder than ever, and to motivate them and to lead them and to inform them and to support them in their work for students. So that's the first thing, that I'm a professional educator of 29 years, and my work has all been from the bottom up. I've been in a school building for 29 years. I interface with central office, but I have never worked in central office, and I think that that has given me a unique perspective. Secondly, I am from West Springfield. I was born in Springfield and raised for the most part in Chicopee, but I've been living in West Springfield for almost 30 years, and this town has taken me in, and I am committed to it, and this is the only job that I'm applying for other than my current job. Not only is it the only superintendent job, it's the only job I'm applying for. And I'm applying because I live here, and my children went through the West Springfield Public Schools, and we live here. Most of our family and friends are here, and I've done most of my coaching and my volunteer work here. And what I'm proud of in terms of the work I do in my current school and in both districts I work in, I'm proud of that. I work with good people, and but I would be honored to do that work here with us and with you and for you. At this point in my life, in my career, in my personal and professional life, to do this work here in West Springfield at this time, this really important time in our country's history and in education, that's why I'm sitting in front of you tonight. And lastly, I would go back to the documents that I gave you that I referred to before, and I would want you to know that the way, not just what I have tried to do as an educator, but the how that I've done it is important. So those examples of letters from teachers and assistant principals and curriculum directors and colleagues, and up through my current superintendent and director of EL and director of special education, it's not something that's new. It's something that I've been doing for, I think those letters span 23 years. And those speak to the kind of person I am at work, how I try to approach challenges, how I try to be a professional, and how I try to do my job on a daily basis. So those three things, the fact that I'm a professional educator with what I think is a significant experience, the fact that I would love to do it here in the town that I live in and that our family was raised in, that we're part of the fabric of this community, and focusing on the how I try to do the work that I do every day. I would want you to please take that into consideration as you choose the next superintendent. I'd be honored to do it, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Any final questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming with us. We appreciate you having you here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me. Good night.
We'll move to have a recess until 6:30.
Do you want me to make a motion, or you made it? Okay.
All right, welcome back. We are back at 6:30 for our second interview. I'm going to acknowledge Liz from MASC, who's going to bring Stefania and Rochelle in. Welcome. I have a little statement to read, then we'll let you go into your presentation. Oh. Okay. And does she have a copy of the questions down there? She does. Okay. All right. Welcome. As you know, to prepare for this interview, we asked you to complete the following performance task. We know that effective school districts analyze data and identify clear improvement priorities and high leverage practices to improve student learning. As part of your interview, we'd like you to review the DART and MCAS data available for the West Springfield schools and identify data points which you believe should be areas of focus. After identifying the data point, please outline for us the process you would follow to take us from identifying the data points to creating priorities and honing in on high-level practices to improve instruction. Just a reminder to please keep your presentation to 10 minutes or less. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. And I just want to begin with, I understand the task, but if I were to normally do that, I wouldn't just start with data points that we were looking for to improve. So the first slide is the district in context, and so there's currently 9 schools. There's about $16,000 spent per pupil with 626 full-time positions. The average is about 11.2 students per educator. There are 55% of the students are considered low income compared to 42% in Massachusetts. And if you look at the high needs rate percentage, it is 63.5% compared to 55% with the state. So the 2 data points that I selected to look at were elementary math and 2 in particular schools with their data. And so when we look at the elementary math MCAS achievement data for 2022, there's a comparison that goes all the way down to 2018. And since 2018, the percentage of students meeting expectations has decreased in 3rd grade through 5th grade. The percentage of students partially meeting expectations has increased in 3rd through 5th grade, and the percentage of students not meeting expectations has increased in 3rd through 5th grade. And so we know we want to move in the opposite direction. We want students to be in the exceeding expectations category and the meeting expectations category. You can see that in the 4th grade, that there has been a large increase in the students that are meeting expectations, so we're starting to close that gap. And also, just to remember, this has taken us from prior to COVID through COVID. When we look at some elementary math subgroup data, in particular, the students with disabilities in grades 3, 4, and 5 in math are below the state average. In 3rd grade, our students in West Springfield had scored an average of 470, and the state had scored 475. In the 4th grade, the West Springfield students had scored 470 compared to 476. And in 5th grade, the students with disability had an average scaled score of 471 compared to the state average of 477. But I also want to note that the student growth percentile for the L's in 4th and 5th grade was equal to or higher than the state student growth percentile. So I reviewed the data, I identified some priorities, and from there would be data meetings looking at MCAS and iReady data. There would be subgroups looked at and domains, professional development on specific standards and domains, coaching, and then learning walks to monitor the high-quality instructional materials, how they're being implemented, and the progress that's being made. When we look at the professional development that we would do, we would look at, how do we use the data gathered from the 3 different diagnostics to plan for group and individualized instruction? How would we drill down to specific subgroups? Then we would work with educators to establish mathematic goals to focus learning and create goals with learning progressions and use the goals to guide the instructional decisions. We would then train administrators and educators on what to look for in the classroom. And finally, we would work together to develop a learning walk tool that would measure the implementation of the high-quality instructional material. During the math data meetings, we would meet with administrators to discuss the school accountability percentile, math MCAS overall data, performance, student growth in subgroups. Administrators would look and work with their instructional leadership teams and use data protocols to look at it. And then administrators would also meet 3 times a year with curriculum associates who actually runs the math curriculum to review the iReady diagnostic data. The other school-specific data that I had decided to pull was on 2 different elementary schools, one being Coburn and one being Tatham. When we looked at Coburn Elementary School, some data points that I selected were the accountability percentile, looking that it had decreased from the 22nd percentile to the 17th percentile, and then looking at the science scores. So there was a decrease in science for all students, but then in particular for the EL and former EL students. And the next steps in science, we would have to look at the schedules to see if there was time on learning in all content areas. We could analyze the curriculum, texts, tasks, and units that are being used in science. We would then review and use their access data to plan for the EL's proficiency levels, and then plan and implement lessons that include visual, verbal, and procedural scaffolds that could promote language access. And the last school would be Tatham. Their school accountability percentile decreased from the 54th percentile to the 32nd percentile in 2022. In ELA, all students decreased from 502 to 490 in 2022. And in math, they decreased from 503 to 490. And the next steps there would be to look at their schedules, have quarterly data meetings to analyze the math and ELA data, conduct learning walks designed to look at curriculum implementation, and then we would work on providing specific feedback to educators to improve their instructional practices. So in conclusion, there's many positive strides that have been made in the West Springfield Public Schools, starting with the purchase of high-quality instructional material. A district strategic plan would help align the priorities and goals in every school to make sure that they're aligned and that we all focus on the same goals. And then there'd be scheduled data meetings and learning walks to help support administrators and educators monitor progress towards those goals.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to shift over now to questions. Each school committee member has 2 questions, and we do have them in front of you now. You should have a copy of them in front of you. They are a little longer, so if you need them to be repeated, just let us know. But we'll start with Ms. Farrell.
Welcome, Stefania. Thank you for taking the time to apply for superintendent of West Springfield Public Schools, and thank your staff for the wonderful time that we had in Springfield. My question, what have you done to prepare yourself for the superintendency? How would you describe your leadership style, and what are the strengths that you bring to the position? What would be your personal professional development plan were you to become our superintendent?
Okay, so I'm going to start with the first part of the question. So what have I done to prepare myself for the superintendency? So I've worked in public education for the past 24 years. I started out as an educator. I was then a reading specialist, an assistant principal at the middle school, a reading director for the entire district that goes in between the second and third largest district in New England. I was an elementary school principal at a very high-performing school, and then also a level 4 school, and so I became a turnaround principal there. And then finally, moving to central office to be the chief instructional officer, where the decisions I make impact pre-K to 12 students, educators at all levels, and administrators at all levels. I look at feedback, the Massachusetts evaluation system as far as, increasing and supporting teachers and administrators in their practices. And through many of those experiences, they have prepared me for the superintendency. How I would describe my leadership style and what are the strengths I bring to the position, I would say that I have a very distributive leadership style. And so I work well in collaboration with a team. Even though I understand that I'm the final decision maker, I like to throw ideas out there. I like to get feedback. I like my team members to throw their ideas out there so we can actually work through them to come up with a final plan. I like to build up educators. I've worked with many educators starting when they were student teachers, and then when you notice that they have that leadership capability, you want to push them, and many of them have become leaders. And so those are some of the strengths. What would be your personal professional development plan? So coming into a new district, there are many things that I have to learn. I'd have to get to know the schools, their culture, their climate, their leaders. I would have to get to know the community much better as far as community partners that are involved in the schools, the cultural leaders in the community, the mayor, the school committee members, and those are all different people that I would actually have to build relationships and get to know better in order to lead the West Springfield Public Schools. The other professional development I would want to know is some of the professional development that has already been done here. So working with a team, knowing what's already been done, setting goals, and then moving forward to see, okay, what do we do next to increase student achievement? The last piece would really be understanding the curriculum that's currently used. And so I am familiar with a lot of the curriculum, but not all of the curriculum that's currently being used. So those are some of the things that I would have to build upon for professional development in West Springfield.
Ms. Thompson.
Welcome, Stefania. Special education is a particular challenge because of the complexity of rules, services needed, and student and parent concerns. When you assess the effectiveness of your special education program, what are some of the criteria you use?
So I would probably start out with the tiered focus monitoring report that is done after so many years to make sure that we're in compliance with everything. And if we weren't in compliance, I would start there. Moving forward from there, I would look at data pieces. Are the students with disabilities making the gains that the other students are making? Really drilling into specific grade levels, specific content levels. But I wouldn't just use the MCAS data. We know that in K through 8, we also have iReady data that we can drill down. We would look at attendance data. Sometimes students with disabilities, or all students, it may not be the academics that they're having a challenge with. It could be the attendance. It could be the social emotional piece. So you have to look at all those pieces when you're looking at the students with disability, the programming that they're currently in. Are they in the right program? I know that there's multiple programs depending on the student's needs, depending on their grids, and from there we would look at placement. I also know that there are parent advisory groups, and so that is another group that I would want to meet with. So the Students with Disabilities Parent Advisory Group, would have a lot of information, and if they get the concerns from other parents, they would bring it to that meeting. And I also have an open door policy. If there's something that is not working out in a specific school, yes, we always want the schools to address it first. If it has to come to me, I'll work with the administrators to get it solved.
Ms. Marcus.
This year, we are implementing a new literacy program based in the science of reading. Please share with us your understanding of the sciences of reading, as well as how you would support this initiative, which is still very new and uncomfortable to many teachers and administrators, while working collaboratively with all stakeholders to move us forward.
Well, on my visit on Thursday, we spoke about this a lot with educators in elementary schools, and I actually got to see them using the new reading program in some classrooms. And so when we talk about the science of reading, it is a struggle for many of us that were trained under Fontes and Pinnell, under the miscue analysis, and some of us had a lot of success with that, and now we're saying, okay, we need to change. But we also have to realize that as educators, we need to be lifelong learners, and the research that has been done over the past 40 years is the science of reading. So it's not a program, it's studies that have been conducted and research that has been done that really goes back to the 5 components of literacy, saying that we need to focus on the phonics, the phonemic awareness, comprehension, fluency, and vocabulary. And that if we really do the phonemic awareness and the phonics systematically, that students will be leaving K1 and 2 reading. The struggle being that most of us were heavily trained the other way. And so to say, okay, now we need to push that away, give it up, and change into this new reading program, change is hard. But I do think that over time we will see we will see the success. And if we do Tier 1 really well, which this program is a Tier 1 program, we would have less students needing supports in Tier 2 and Tier 3. So I think moving forward, as they see success and the students are able to read better, spell better, because once they can put the phonemic awareness with the phonics and the syntax all together, I think that's when you start to change people's minds towards the whole science of reading. But it isn't until, you know, they've had the training and they see some of the successes.
Mr. Levers?
Hi. How will you keep the school committee informed? In particular, what is your strategy around issues that are your responsibility, but where the school committee may have an interest?
So I think it's really important to keep the school committee informed. I know there are the formal school committee meetings, there's subcommittee meetings, but I also know that those aren't enough to keep the school committee informed. And so I'd inform them on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis as far as when the meetings were or were not scheduled. When we talk about other incidents, I think it's really important to inform school committee members when there may be an incident that they need to know about, whether it's going to be public or it's not public, with the understanding that they may not be able to receive all the information if it's a personnel matter, but they need to know that the incident has occurred. The other piece, as far as a strategy, is just having an open door policy, you know, them feeling free to call me at any time if they have a concern, and me having that opportunity as well to call them to get suggestions, or if I have any concerns that I've heard about. Other interests that they may have are with policy. So school committee does vote on policy. And as far as policy on my part, it would be my obligation to make sure that the policies are enforced and followed in the school department. And how I roll that out with administrators and educators would be a priority. And it's also a priority to hear it back the other way if school committee members hear that policies are not being followed, so I can address that.
Ms. Goin.
For the past 3 years, West Springfield has been engaged in the important work of educational equity through the lens of MTSS. As you know, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion can be interpreted in many ways, from racial, gender, religious diversity to neurodiversity, various levels of abilities in special education, to issues of socioeconomic diversity and class. What are your overarching thoughts about these classifications in your experience leading this work? How would you work to ensure that none of these important populations are lost in the shuffle?
So my overarching thoughts about these classifications would be that we all need to have an understanding of what these classifications are to start out with, and understand that our students fit into these classifications. How I would experience, my experience in leading this work, I've done a lot of equity work in my current system. It's been the past 4 years with the objective of having students feel like they belong in the schools, because they do belong. That's why we exist. And developing those culturally responsive teaching practices to make the students feel welcome, have the parents feel welcomed, because if they don't feel like you care and that they're welcomed, they are not going to come in and learn for you. When we talk about in the MTSS, I will say that years ago when I had started the work with MTSS, which was as the reading director, we were looking at straight curriculum and interventions for educational purposes in reading and math. In the past 10 years, we've moved to just looking at interventions for academics, to having interventions for behavioral, as well as the social emotional. So we've implemented curriculums in these two areas, such as second steps in one area. We have PBIS when we look at the social emotional part. We collect data on that to get better achievement or to support students at the way that they needed to be supported. And so there is a large plan for MTSS that incorporates all three of those parts now. How would I work to ensure that none of these important populations are lost in the shuffle? It would be by looking at data. And so I know that in PBIS we collect Swiss data, and so that's individual data that's collected on each student, and then it's tiered. And so some students are great in Tier 1, and some may need other supports in Tier 2 or Tier 3. We can also look at graduation rate. We can look at pass rate in specific classes. We can look at AP enrollment. And so there's a lot of different data points that we can look at to make sure that none of these populations are lost in the shuffle.
Thank you.
Mr. Mancini.
The citizens in our community demand value for their tax dollars and transparency and fiscal accountability. In this light, tell us about how you have ensured that the budget you propose and the financial plan that you oversee as approved by the school committee is as compact and efficient as possible. And it's 3 questions. How do you develop the budget proposal? Whose input do you solicit in developing the budget? What has been your history working with municipal officials like a city councilor or mayor to garner support for your budget? Partner support.
Okay, so the first part is how do you develop the budget proposal? And so in past years, looking at the budget, I would look at what the past expenditures were, what the employee costs are, what their raises are, looking at specific contracts to see are the contracts expiring, do they need to be renewed, or is it something that we can cut from the budget? The other thing would be additions. Are there any new state mandates that are coming around? That is something that sometimes we call unfunded mandates that are coming that we also have to support. So looking at all of that and then looking at the different funding sources that are coming in. So we know that we have general fund money that comes in, and it changes depending on what the state, how the funds that the state has. Currently looking at ESSER funds or Student Opportunity Act funds, and then looking at, with these additional funds at this time, are there one-time purchases that could be made as far as using these funds to increase student achievement or support building improvements. And so I would look at all those funding resources, look at the needs, making sure that all of these needs are in line with the strategic plan and the goals, and then decide on what was going to be funded from there. Whose input do you solicit in developing the budget? Once there is a strategic plan and goals, I would want feedback from the community through surveys. And so there's surveys that can be put out that are all aligned, where the community, parents, community members that aren't parents because it's their tax dollars too, students, educators, administrators could go on and they could list, okay, what do they feel is most important to prioritize and what should be funded. Also speaking to the mayor to see, there are some departments that are shared in between the school department and the city. We would look at what the needs are there, the school committee, principals. And so there's a lot of people that would have to be considered prior to finalizing a budget. What has been your history with working with municipal officials like a city council or a mayor to garner support for your budget? So I've worked directly with the CFO and the superintendent to make sure that the budget is clear, that it's organized, that it's all aligned to the priorities. As far as working with the school committee, the budget that we develop, we do present it to the school committee and they make a decision on yes, what will be funded and what will not be funded. And then our CFO works directly with the city CFO and the mayor to pass the budget.
Ms. Thompson.
Given the stress in the lives of young people today and the social, academic, and even financial pressures they face, how can educators in general, and a superintendent in particular, have an impact on the emotional well-being of students? How do you view the social and emotional well-being of children in the context of establishing a high-performing school population in the decade to come?
So I think these stresses always existed, but I think after the pandemic, they've been exacerbated, and so we're seeing them even more and more. But starting out, I think something as simple as being nice. And so the way that you speak to people, the way that I speak to people is the way that I expect to be spoken to. I'm not yelling at people. I don't expect educators to be yelling at students. And when students feel respected, they more likely than not are not screaming back at the adult. I have to bring into account that when I was in the high school, there was a student sitting at the bottom of the stairs, and the administrator went up to him, asked him if he was okay. The student responded. The administrator said, pointed him to an adult that he was familiar with, and the student got up from the stairs and went to that adult. And there was no incident, and the administrator obviously had a relationship with that student that was in there. And so when we talk about building relationships, I think it's really important that educators and administrators and even the superintendent build rapport with their constituents, so the families, the students, and there is a better response when there is that mutual respect that goes back and forth. I think adding into this, but it's not the end-all and be-all, there should be a social-emotional curriculum that is used, but I don't believe the social-emotional curriculum will be effective without the relationship building from the administrators and the educators. How do I view this moving forward as far as being a high-performing school population? It will go back to building that relationship with the students. When students feel like they're cared for and they know they are cared for, they will respond. We can't go in with the instruction first. You have to go in with that relationship building. And I think that's how we will move this district forward as far as the social, emotional piece. Once that's in place, then the academics will come.
Ms. Marcus?
How would you define high-quality instructional materials? What is an example of high-quality curriculum and what makes it high quality? Have you previously assessed instructional materials to ensure quality? And can you tell us about a time when you had to address the use of poor quality instructional materials?
So I will answer the first part first. High-quality instructional materials. So years ago, and it still exists, there's something that's called Ed Reports that evaluates tons and tons of curriculum. And so that was the resource that I used to decide, okay, which curriculums will we put forward to a team of parents and a team of educators and administrators to see, okay, let's select something out of these. But we've moved past that. Massachusetts and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed now have a process called Curate. And so they use Ed Reports and then the Curate system, and they have educators actually evaluate these curriculums, and they make sure, first of all, that they are aligned to the Massachusetts state standards. And after that, they look to see the progression. Is it the right progression? Are the tasks the right tasks for students at that specific grade level? And then we move on from there where, is it easy for students to use? Is it easy for educators to use? And is there an assessment that will be used that will measure student performance? The other thing that these high-quality instructional materials need are opportunities for differentiation. And so we know that we have students of all different abilities in our classrooms. We have ELs, we have students with disabilities, we have students that need acceleration. So there are opportunities in this curriculum to address the needs of all learners in this classroom. The next piece, what is an example of high-quality curriculum and what makes it high quality? So a high-quality curriculum that is currently being used in the West Springfield Public Schools is Ready Math. It is high quality because it has gotten a high rating on Curate as well as in Ed Reports. Besides that, it is aligned to the Massachusetts state standards. It has different instructional pieces that can be used for students with disabilities, for advanced learners, for ELs. It has a progression of standards. It even actually has information if students need additional support. It explains what had to be done or mastered in the prior year. And so it is very aligned. Have I previously addressed instructional materials to ensure quality? So yes, as far as curriculum selection, I think we've selected curriculum in all content areas in my current district in the past 6 years. And so there are rubrics that are available through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. And so we select 3 different curriculums, and then we use the rubrics in teams to decide from there which curriculum would be the best for our student population. Can you tell us about a time when you've had to address the use of poor quality instructional materials? So yes, as we do learning walks where we are looking for implementation of the high quality instructional materials. As you know, as a school committee, curriculum costs a lot of money, and so it's not good enough that it's just purchased and put in the classrooms. It has to be used. And so when we go around looking for implementation of this, if it's not being used, it's addressed with the administrator because the administrator's there on the learning walks, and then it's addressed with the educator. And so that's if they're not using the curriculum that is purchased. We've also seen worksheets that are coming out all the time, and that's just not, and it's not part of the curriculum that's being used. And so we're not expecting that educators are sitting there with piles of worksheets in front of students. And so that's also addressed with the educator.
Mr. Levers.
Tell us about any experience you have had with a building project and any knowledge or experience working with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
So I have two different experiences working with MSBA building two different elementary schools. So one of the elementary schools that I worked at was on the list. So the superintendent and the CFO works with the city to create a list of schools that either need additions on, need improvements, or need to be rebuilt. And so I was the principal of one of these schools. So I was able to work directly with MSBA when they did the whole feasibility study with the architects as well as with the engineers to decide, okay, was this building was this building structurally sound? And so once that determination was made, we moved on from there through the process where contractors were selected, as well as, now I lost my train of thought. Well, the contractors were selected. And from there, we had to do an educational piece. And so it was my responsibility to write the educational plan once we moved to that process, meeting with all departments, looking at special ed programs. Would we decide to put specific special ed programs because that would change the way that the classrooms were configured? How many students were we planning? Were we going to rezone some of the schools so more would go to these larger schools? And so looking at the curriculum, meeting with every department to see what needed to be put into place, and then working with the architects to design the building, making sure that it had everything that it needed for the students, for the educators, working with our city side because, of course, we want to put everything in a building, and there has to be someone that puts on the brakes because the funds, you can't overspend. And so the architects may be showing you all these wonderful things, and then it has to be scaled back so it comes in at the correct budget. And so I've had the opportunity to work on the DeBerry Swan School as well as the Lincoln School. And so one of them is opened, and the other one will be open this coming fall. So I have had two different experiences working with MSBA.
Ms. Coyne.
How do you seek opportunities to improve the learning environment to better meet the needs of students from all over the world and for students who have been historically vulnerable, underserved, and marginalized, including multilingual learners and students with disabilities, or as I prefer to say, with various abilities?
So I think we have to begin with the culturally responsive teaching practices and seeing the students for who they are. So when we look at the different cultures, which West Springfield is very rich with different cultures, that's something that we really want to celebrate. We also want to celebrate the linguistic differences with all these students. So once upon a time, it may have seemed that speaking another language wasn't an asset, but we are in a different time period where that's a huge asset, and that should be celebrated. There's even opportunities with that to celebrate that by pushing students to get that seal of biliteracy. And so we have the opportunity now to have students be fluent in two different languages and celebrating their accomplishments and their achievements when they do that. So how do we make this learning environment better? Educators have to understand how to build those relationships with the students, and whether that be, having the families come in, having community groups come in, so we understand the cultures that they represent better. There are also as far as the students with disabilities, I think, as far as just being seen, knowing that their educators see them. So that's where I would go with that one. Building those relationships. I know that I had talked about that in a prior answer, and making sure that the environment is safe for these students to learn. Not only physically safe, but it has to be safe so they're willing to participate in the class and engage in the learning. And so it does come down to the administrator and the educator making that space safe for them to participate.
I don't know if I saw your pen track and I didn't know if there was anything else. Mr. Mancini, I'm sorry.
Have you been involved in state-level activities related to public education? How would you see yourself representing our district, lobbying or participating on task forces and working group? What issues are of most concern to you?
So I guess fortunately and unfortunately, I've been able to work with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed a lot. One, for being, when I was the principal, when I was moved to the underperforming school. And so when you're a level 4 school, or that was the old name for it, there is a lot of oversight by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. So they meet often, they come in often, they do learning walks, they look at data. There's plans that have to be developed and have to be approved by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. And so there was a very strong collaboration during that time working with them. Other experiences I've had with them in particular is writing specific grants that support educator learning. And so if there are opportunities for educators to gain additional professional development, or if there are specific grants out there to support the learning of students, that's another way that I have worked with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. I continue to work with them at the district level to support priority schools. And so when schools fall below the 10th percentile, a district must write a priority school plan. And so from that plan, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed also has to approve that plan. And then you work in conjunction with them and you progress monitor throughout the year to gauge the performance and well-being of each school. Another opportunity that I've worked with state level is that I co-chair the Urban Superintendent Network, and I've done that for the past 4 years, where there's about 35 districts in Massachusetts, including West Springfield, that are included in the Urban Superintendent Network. And so we meet monthly, and we have professional development. We work in conjunction with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. The superintendents decide what professional development is most important for them at that time. The past 2 months, it has been on English language learners and how we're instructing them. And so we do professional development with that, but with the goal of superintendents bringing it back to their district and sharing it with their district, their administrators, their educators. And so the last piece of that meeting is when the Department of Elementary and Secondary leaves, and it's advocacy. And it's the urban superintendents deciding on which bills they want to move forward in the legislature that will support students and specific cities or public school systems. One that was large a few years ago was the Student Opportunity Act that they asked districts and mayors to sign off on because it wasn't being funded at the appropriate level that it should have been funded. And so when the superintendents get together at those meetings, they decide, what to sign off on, what they should push with their legislators to make sure that appropriate funds come to their districts. An issue that is of most concern to me is the funding, making sure that cities and towns that have the greatest needs are funded at the appropriate level. It is a challenge when they do an October 1st census, and we have students that enter in after October 1st, whether it be, refugees or and other influxes of groups that come in, and that we don't get that funding for a long time. But districts are expected to take students in and educate them at that time. And so that is a concern to me, that I feel that, that's something that the state should be working on as far as that October 1st census number.
Thank you. We'd now like to give you the opportunity to make a closing statement. Please include in your statement why you are seeking the West Springfield superintendency and why now.
So I'm seeking the West Springfield superintendency because after 24 years in public education and working in currently the third largest district, I feel that I have the experience and the knowledge at all different levels, pre-K to 12, with curriculum, with educators, with administrators, with family, with the community, with, outside agencies, that after all of this time, I've gained the knowledge that I feel that it's the time that I could be the superintendent for the West Springfield Public Schools. I think that West Springfield would be a great place to be the superintendent. It's the only place that I've actually applied for. I think it's really rich in culture. It's rich in the linguistic differences. It's a city, although it is a community where the community gets together. And so I just, as far as the size of it, it's a great city to work in. Why now? I feel like after all of these experiences, now is the time to take the next step to become the superintendent of West Springfield.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll take a 15-minute recess and return at 7:35. Thank you. All right, welcome back. At this point, what we have left on our agenda is the appointment of a superintendent. What we'll do now is get updates from the two members that visited districts, Ms. Farrell and Ms. Marcus, and myself, who spent the day with each candidate, and then we'll entertain a motion. I'll ask that any discussion on the candidates specifically, whether or not their fitness for the position, be held off until we have a motion. Start with Ms. Farrell.
Thank you to the 13 members of the Superintendent Search Committee, including Colleen and Kira, as co-chairs. I appreciate the time and effort everyone gave to this important position. Last week, on Thursday and Friday, I spent the day in Springfield and Longmeadow, respectively, and then attended the meet and greets for both candidates. Both districts said that they do not want the candidate to leave their district, and all conversations expressed a feeling that both candidates would bring many strengths to the table. Stefania has worked in many different capacities in Springfield, including teacher, vice principal, principal, director of literacy, and chief instructional officer. She worked with administrators to improve teacher evaluation and was principal of a DeBerry school when they moved out of being a level 4 school. She is passionate about students and equity for all. She promotes instructional material with equity. She worked on the portrait of a graduate for Springfield Public Schools. Tom also brings a skill set that would enable him to be a strong superintendent. Tom has been a teacher, assistant principal, and principal. Tom is well respected. He is an authentic person who sets high expectations for all. He knows policy, Massachusetts general laws. He is the go-to person when someone has a question. Tom is an earnest leader and values all. He has an open door policy. He puts things into action. He knows the contracts, is knowledgeable on legal issues, and knowledgeable about special education laws. He builds relationships with families. He is always available and a great communicator, understands budget process, has the difficult conversations when needed. He told his school council he wanted to contribute to his community of West Springfield. He's never dismissive of anyone. He is an instructional leader who is data-driven, and he is extremely well-read. Thank you.
Ms. Marcus?
So I hope I don't repeat too much of what Nancy had to say. Again, I wanted to thank everybody who took the time to send us emails, contact us via phone. I'd also like to thank the original search committee who sent forth our finalists for tonight. I can tell you that both Thursday and Friday's visits were very informative, and certainly the fact that we are very fortunate to have the best, two incredibly knowledgeable and highly respected finalists. In Springfield, we met with over 40 stakeholders, ranging from school and district level directors and staff to teachers, paraeducators, union leaders, school committee members, community partners. Some common themes that arose included her knowledge and experience and understanding of education from the pre-K level to grade 12, as well as her turnaround work as a principal and a critical member of the Springfield Central Office team. Teachers at DeBerry School, where she did, which was the school she turned around, talked about her changing the culture and climate almost instantly and bringing empathy and joy to the school. They described her as someone who was a listener, who's open to ideas and feedback, very data-driven, but always puts kids first. Approachable, builds relationships, inspiring and empowering. She was described as being a promoter of people. Family liaison at the school talked about her respect for parents, always positive, energetic, very welcoming. Teachers feel comfortable to have her in their rooms, always smiling, always gave feedback in a timely manner, and was always beginning with a positive and followed by constructive criticism, constructive feedback. A distributive leader doesn't micromanage. The superintendent said she did an exemplary job at every level and described her as having a clear vision, expectations, strong knowledge base, and being a strong collaborator. And stressed that she worked her entire career in a diverse community. She's got strong knowledge of education, which supports multilingual learners as well as students with disabilities, and ensures the directors of those departments always have a seat at the table. The K through 12 directors elevated how culturally responsive teaching, how important culturally responsive teaching was to her, understands what diversity looks like and feels like, and understands the importance of high-quality instructional materials. She's passionate about early childhood and high-quality instructional materials, strong ties to the community, including STCC and AIC partnerships, and she was described as being a great global thinker. In Longmeadow, we met with over 20 stakeholders, including the superintendent, district directors, and school department chairs, as well as union representation, former school committee member, high school students, parents, teachers, and even the custodian. The superintendent described Tom as being strong, steady, and clear, being highly visible. He knows policies, contracts, budgets. He's great with kids, and he's very hands-on, informed, and communicative, elevates and honors good teaching and student voice. Described him as the resident lawyer because he knows the laws and regulations. Former school committee member referred to him as being upfront, very visible, creates a warm and welcoming environment, able to de-escalate serious situations while remaining calm. Phenomenal working with teachers, parents. You always see him, he is at everything. Described as one of the finest leaders to work with, authentic, ethical, shapes the culture of the community, decisive, optimistic, student-centered, and a great sense of humor. Guides us but gives us independence. His door is always open, and no one ever has any reservations about going to him. Has the respect of everyone. He was referred to as the jewel of Longmeadow. Handles everyone with respect, professionalism that transcends everything he does. Open-minded, fair play, great listener. Very upfront and clear, wants feedback. Collaborative, honest, a great mentor, and transparent. He's the whole package. Such a good person, the best leader I've ever had the pleasure to learn from. It was a pleasure, truly a pleasure, to go to both districts.
Thank you both for volunteering to do that, and thank Kira and Colleen for co-chairing the search committee, and as well as all those that volunteered to be on the search committee. And additionally, everyone that gave us feedback, whether it be through that search committee process and the survey, or over the past week and a half, as we brought candidates through the schools and had the meet and greets. I was deeply disappointed and concerned back last year when Tim told us that he was going to take a job with DESE, and had concerns about kind of what was going to happen in the district. And had concerns about it's a tough position to take, as we see from the many districts around us that are searching for a superintendent. It's a tough job. And as many of you know in the audience and watching at home, it's only gotten tougher through the pandemic. But I'm also confident with the two finalists we have. I had a great time with both of them, two great people, two different candidates, certainly with two different backgrounds. But I do think two great candidates, and it was a great work of the search committee to bring that forward and to give us the opportunity, while this is a difficult decision, to give us that opportunity to make a big change here in our district. And I think the biggest feedback I received from teachers when I kind of met after with them on Friday after they got to meet both candidates was the concern about stability and having someone that's going to be here that's going to stay. Because now I've been here for 8 years, and this will be my fourth superintendent. And those that have worked in the district longer know it's been more. So that was one of the biggest things that I heard from people is stability, the ability to work with the stakeholders in the district, work with students, teachers, and also the community. We know it's a special community, a unique community here in West Springfield, and there's a lot of concern about that. So with that, I thank all of you that has provided us feedback. I'll entertain a motion. Ms. Thompson.
Motion to appoint Stefania Rochella to the position of Superintendent of West Springfield Public Schools pending the successful negotiation of a contract.
Second.
And the motion is second. As I said before, we'll leave specific comments about candidates until now. So discussion on the candidates. Ms. Farrell and then Ms. Alevers.
Tonight, as a school committee, we have the difficult job of selecting a superintendent for West Springfield Public Schools. Like my fellow committee members, I have reviewed their resumes, met with staffs in their districts, and read many emails. I have also had the opportunity to talk with people who have worked with both candidates professionally. After a long thought process, I have decided to support Tom Landers as superintendent. I believe he has the skills needed to lead our district.
Ms. Levers.
I just want to say that both come with strong skill sets and are looked up to in both their communities, and they both have done the best for them. And they both look forward to representing West Springfield. For me, I second Stefania because I think she comes with a knowledge of a diverse community that West Springfield has.
Anyone else? Ms. Thompson.
The magnitude of this decision was not lost on me, and because of that, I made it a point to ask for feedback from all the teachers and everyone I met on our walkthroughs last week. It was really important to hear what they had to say because it's about all of you and all of town and all of the students and not just the committee members up here. So I took everything that everyone said to me to heart while I was making this decision. I've got so many calls and emails and texts today and the last couple of days. Everyone has so many thoughts. Almost everyone was very happy with the two candidates that we had brought forward. As you said, stability was the number one thing they were looking for. Also, having the background to be able to go to someone that's done this before was high on the list. I just want to thank everyone, the search committee, for bringing forward two amazing candidates, and I look forward to seeing what we can do in the future.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Coyne?
May I make my comments first and then say?
What?
I just had a few comments.
Yeah,
to
this
say
is the
first and
opportunity.
then-
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I did also want to thank and acknowledge the 13 members of the search committee. Thank you, co-chairs Kira and Colleen. It definitely was a lot of work by all of them. The members of the community who joined us last week for the meet and greets, those who reached out to me, all of you who took time out today and tonight to come and sit and join and listen to these two great candidates. I did want to take a quick moment to acknowledge Interim Superintendent Perrone for stepping up and all the work during this transition. This is one of the most important decisions a school committee makes. And as Kira said, it is not lost on me as well as the magnitude of making this decision. It's the most important for this community and this committee, as we're all here to support the success of our students in this district. Things that I reflect on as I went through materials, heard, and met with the candidates, I come down to what do we need in the district? What experience is being brought to the table? What is best for students, our staff, and West Springfield's future? We have two great candidates with various backgrounds and experience, and we are very lucky. I would like to thank both Tom and Stefania for your time and commitment to your students in the communities that you currently serve and for wanting to come to West Springfield. We expect a visionary and an empathetic leader, one who is a good communicator, accountable, listens, is visible, builds relationships, and supports the people on their team. We need somebody with a breadth of experience and partnerships which will benefit West Springfield, to which we can capitalize and support the unique diversity and needs of our district. With this in mind, and after careful consideration, I believe the best candidate to move West Springfield forward is Stefania Roshila. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Mr. Mancini.
Yes.
Ms. Coyne,
Yes.
Ms. Oleveris.
Yes.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
Ms. Marcus,
Yes.
Ms. Farrell.
No.
Mayor Reichelt votes yes. Stefania is appointed pending successful negotiations. I'd ask that we take a second unanimous vote. Do I have a motion to do so?
Motion to take a unanimous vote.
Do I have a second? Second. Call the roll. Mr. Mancini,
Yes.
Ms. Coyne,
Yes.
Ms. Oleveris.
Yes.
Ms. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Marcus.
Yes.
Ms. Farrell.
Yes.
Mayor Reichelt votes yes. I'll call both candidates tonight and update the school committee afterwards. Our next school committee meeting is February 28th, 2023, and due to this meeting not having any regular business of the school committee besides the appointment of the superintendent, that meeting will be televised in this room at 6 p.m. We have a motion to adjourn. Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you, Westside.